Good afternoon, and let me start by complimenting the chairs that they're doing an excellent job, and we've been spot on time, and I hope to maintain that, and I hope my panelists will help me do that. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As the topic clearly makes it out, that we now move from the general to specific. Those of you who are connected with India are aware that India's Clean Ganga program is one of the largest sustainable infrastructure projects, not only in India, but I'm told it is one of the largest projects of this kind in the world. The organization which is responsible to run this program is called the National Mission for Clean Ganga, and they were supposed to be here, but due to some developments, they had some work in India and they couldn't come in, and I was called in at the last moment to fill in, and I'll try and take up that responsibility. River Ganga is the lifeline for almost 40% people in India, and that, if you convert that into numbers, it is like 500 million people. The river basin of Ganga is not only the most populated river basin in the world, but unfortunately, it is at the moment one of the most polluted. The challenges of pollution emanate from these sewerage networks of towns and cities that are on the bank of Ganga, overexploitation of fresh water by agriculture, which is the livelihood for most of these 500 million people who reside on the banks of the river. But the government of India has taken up this challenge to not only clean Ganga, but rejuvenate it. And that's why before we move to calling this the ministry as Jal Shakti, or the Water Power Ministry, we called it the River Rejuvenation Ministry. These efforts have been there for a while now. They literally started in the 80s. But 2010 was a significant year. We created a dedicated program to deliver on pollution abatement and river rejuvenation. River Ganga was declared the national river, and as well as accorded a regulatory authority status. The National Mission for Clean Ganga was launched in 2014. The resourcing process, these kind of projects take a lot of resources, especially a lot of finances are involved. The World Bank started funding this project in 2010 with a $1.2 billion US commitment. Government added $3 billion to it, and the program was launched with 7 different components, which were pollution abatement, riverfront, and crematoria development. Those of you from India, again, would know that the last rites performed on the river Ganges is a very common and a sought-after ritual in India. People from far-off places take their loved ones on their demise to the banks of Ganga and cremate them there. The other components are urban river management plans, continuous flow of river, maintaining continuous flow of river, research and knowledge management, afforestation and biodiversity conservation, and obviously, public participation is a very important component of this. Over the years, we've launched around 300 projects, and I'm happy to note that over 100 projects have already been completed. We have premier institutions of which are called IITs, Indian Institute of Technology. I see a lot of people who are alumnus of these institutions. A consortium of 7 IITs was created, led by IIT Kanpur to develop a master plan for the basin. This has been done, and now the Center for Ganga River Basin Management and Studies, cGanga in short, has been mandated to implement this plan and help achieve the targets that have been put in those plans. I'm happy to briefly introduce my 2 panelists. The detailed bios are there in the booklet. We have a board member of cGanga, Sri Sanmit Ahuja, with us. He's been closely linked with this program, and he's literally living between India and UK, taking this program forward. He will take us through the details of these programs. I'm also pleased to have Brian from Climate-KIC. He's working on how EU could feed into the Indian Sustainable Development projects, and he would be touching on how we can do things differently to make this effective. With these words, I invite Sanmit to make his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Manish, and thanks to the organizers for having me here today. I'll just start with, for those of you who don't know, where does the word river come from? Any ideas? The word river. So it comes from the Latin word rivalis, which means rivalry. So those who lived on the opposite banks of the river were rivals because of the water that's flowing in the river. And a few hundred years on, we're absolutely back to that era again, where the next set of wars are being fought on water. Many of us don't know that transboundary issues, yes, but even within the communities, the agriculture communities fighting with the industry, who's fighting with the municipalities, who's fighting with the hydropower, all of them are fighting between each other on the water allocation and rights. So that's really what the complexity of River Ganga is. And I'll try, and in the brief 10, 12 minutes, I'll try and take you through what's really happening on the ground. Those of you who don't know the geography, and it's been mentioned a few times, that's the footprint of the Ganga River Basin. 11 states come under the basin, 5 states on the main stem, but a number of others as well. The key points here are these. For those of you who can't see, 100 billion capital that's needed, and the program will go on for 20, 25 years. Many people think that cleaning a river basin like this can happen in 5 years or 3 years, but many of you don't know that even Thames, which was the fastest cleanup on earth, took 30 years. Danube, Rhine, Murray-Darling, all 40, 45, 50-year cleanup programs. So to expect that Ganga, with the complexity and the population density, will happen overnight is trying to get blood out of stone, so it is not going to happen. This slide is very, very busy slide, but it kind of epitomizes the complexity of the issue. And again, the points to note here are that Many people think it's the crematoria or the waste that's thrown into the river or the industries that are based on the riverbanks that's causing the pollution. But in actual fact, 80% of the pollution comes from municipalities, so sewage, raw sewage going in to the river, about 12 billion liters a day, every day, 12 billion. And the reason that's the case, because most of India is unsewered. So we don't have sewerage networks. Delhi is the largest sewerage footprint with about 45, 50% coverage. Rest of India is even worse. So if there's no network to carry the sewage to the treatment plants, they're going to find their way somehow into the river basin. So that's the big challenge that we are trying to solve. There's, of course, agriculture, there's industrial pollution, whether it's tanneries, textiles, pharmaceuticals, food and beverage, distilleries, sugar, metalworks. I can go on and on. So a large number of industrial clusters along the banks who also dump into the river every day. Manish mentioned the structure. So under the Ministry of what's called Jal Shakti, means water empowerment, this was a recent cabinet reshuffle where a number of government departments were merged into a single line ministry to create one unified government department, under which sits the National Mission for Clean Ganga, which has both the regulatory function and authority as well as the execution authority. And I sit in the think tank, which was set up by the ministry. And the think tank is not just policy making, but it's also the innovation hub, responsibility for implementing pilot projects and bringing new technologies in. So what does cleaning up a river really entail? Largely, it's two things. On this side of the slide, it says Nirmal Dhara, which in Hindi means, or translated from Hindi to English means clean water, clean flow, clean river. And Aviral Dhara means continuous flow. So there's a lot of hydropower activity that gets implemented, and that fractures the river. If there's no water in the river, it doesn't exist at all. So that's a huge, huge challenge as well. So up until now, we've been focused largely on this side, but going forward, there'll be a lot of emphasis on that side as well. If I were to summarize all the aspects, all the issues, these are the 5 key points. Number 1 and 5 are, we could spend days and days together, which is the policy side of things. The policy is distilled into that one single issue, which is valuing water. India is perhaps the only major economy in the world left which doesn't have a national water regulator. There's a gas regulator, power regulator, telecom regulator, highway regulator, but we don't have a water regulator. With Ganga Authority being established, it's assuming the function on that side, but its regulatory functions require unifying the governance, the policies, the states, the center, the municipalities down to the village level, which will take a lot of time. But ultimately, the crux of the issue is we don't value water. The day we start valuing, pricing, costing water properly, all of the issues upstream and downstream will fix themselves. Communities was mentioned. It requires 10, 15, 20 years of behavioral shift. I once attended a discourse, and somebody said, why do you pollute Ganga? And the answer was, well, Ganga is a living goddess, it's a mother, it's unpollutable. That was the answer. And that happens across the board. The Kumbh Mela that you see, although this year Kumbh was a remarkable turnaround with a lot of pollution footprint reduced, but we have to work for 10, 20 years to bring a behavioral shift in communities. I'll focus on 3, given this is an investment conference, I'll focus on the 3 middle bits, which is knowledge, technology, and finance as the key areas that we are working on. There's a whole movement in India which is evidence-based policy making. A lot of the line ministries, there are 11 line ministries that are involved with water, and it's very, very sometimes difficult. One ministry commissions a study report, another ministry commissions a study report, and they're diametrically opposite in the results. And that comes from lack of data. So one of the biggest investments that is going in is establishing a national hub for data and information, which kind of harmonizes this information asymmetry between the different government departments. And I'll talk about that in a second. Knowledge is also on best practices, solutions. Every week for the last 5, 7, 10 years, we've been hosting delegations from Europe, UK, Israel, Australia, name it, and they all come with good, bucket loads of knowledge. This is how Singapore did it, this is how Israel did it, this is how Canada is doing it. But how do you get that knowledge into the Indian context? So part of our mandate is to capture that knowledge and demonstrate through live, real impact projects. So 5 major impact projects have been identified, and we're starting to work on those already. We call them drains rejuvenation. Some of these drains are 60, 70, 80 kilometers long. In other countries, they would be called rivers, but still in the Indian context, they are drains. And finally, we're establishing a numbers of centers of excellence. I mentioned valuing water, so circular economy has to kick in. If it doesn't, we're up for a big issue. Majority of the cost of treated water is electricity. And if every household, which the Prime Minister's announced, if every household has to be at the back end of a pipe connection, just imagine what the electricity demand will be. So unless we are recycling and reusing water, we have a massive issue at hand. There are places in India where water is pumped 300-400 kilometers. There are places in India where every day you're pumping water out of the ground because the groundwater is depleting and depleting. So we don't realize that that's power. And of course, water finance. I mentioned data. So for those of you who are tech-oriented, tech investors, India is establishing the biggest big data center as far as the environment sector is concerned in the world. So this is the blueprint and the framework for that, taking satellite feeds, drone feeds, sensors, handheld devices, ground readings, all coming on stream into a major big data center, and then comes the analytical dashboards where artificial intelligence will actually kick in. So we partnered with a European company out of Slovenia, which taps into the European Space Agency satellite network. So we can actually use European satellites, and now others are also coming in and offering the same to us. So this entity did it for Danube, and we're going to bring the same know-how into India for the Ganga Basin. Once the data comes on stream, what do you do with it? We started to build the artificial intelligence platform, and I have Alchemy Artificial Intelligence is the company that was selected. Mike and Sarah, sitting there at the back, are from Alchemy, so you can talk to them offline. And they're building a fascinating AI intelligence platform for us. Moving on to technologies as such, treatment technologies, all sorts of innovations. There is all the tech in the world to solve all the problems that we're seeing in the Ganga Basin. There's no shortage of technology. We've scanned the globe from Japan to New Zealand to west coast of California, in the west coast of US, and there's some amazing, amazing tech out there. The problem with the tech going into India, they come and present to our officials love it, and then comes the roadblock. How do the officials award that company the project? There's no mechanism whatsoever. If it's not done in India, if it's not seen in India, you can't sell it in India. So the companies need a pathway to implement pilot and demonstration projects. And without a public tender, the government cannot actually just give the project to the company. So who writes the terms of reference for the tender if that technology is not known in the country? So we developed a framework called Environment Technology Verification Process. We've scanned more than 1,000 technologies. The first batch of 15 technologies has been selected. Ken, if you raise your hands. So Ken is one of them, focusing on solid waste that's being dumped and what do you do with solid waste using low energy systems, low energy solutions. There's a lot of innovation. So through the program, a pilot project is awarded to the companies. And I'll come to this slide and then go back. A pilot project is awarded to the companies. They have to go through a panel and screening is done. We look at tech, its implementation in India, their readiness level. Are they ready to work in India? Do they have joint ventures already or not? Have they set up a subsidiary or not? What is their techno-commercial offering? What's the value for money? What's the tariff at which they're going to offer the technology? What's the CapEx, OpEx, everything? And only then the panel will shortlist the companies. So there are two ways. The government is saying, we are happy to give you the project. You have to find the capital and invest in it, and the government underwrites it and reimburses the cost once the technology is successfully demonstrated. Now, for some companies, that's not a problem. For others, it's a huge issue. So we're setting up a dedicated venture capital fund, and I have a colleague, Rob Gaskell, sitting over there, who's actually leading on setting up that fund. It's a 50 million fund with the first 10, 15 technologies already being selected that was going through the program. There was a lot of talk of skills. There was a lot of talk of entrepreneurship. We're linking this program to every major initiative going on, whether it's Startup India, Digital India, Make in India. All of those aspects are being covered. There's a massive upskilling exercise. We need 5 to 7 million people trained in the water sector over the next 10, 15 years if this program has to succeed. So there's a lot of knowledge that has to be imparted and pushed through the system. Just moving on, I mentioned most of India is unsewered. So for the next 10, 15 years, whilst the sewerage networks as part of the Smart City initiative are being built, what happens then? If we don't clean up our drains, the cities and towns will remain dirty and polluted. So there's going to be a lot of focus and emphasis on decentralized infrastructure. So there are containerized water treatment solutions. You put this 20-foot container along the drains every half a kilometer, every kilometer, and these things can be up and running in 3 days. Versus building a large interceptor sewer network and taking that all the way out to sewage treatment plants will take 4, 5, 6 years. And that's why when a lot of you come to India, you don't see the progress, because it takes 5 years for those 5, 7 years for those types of projects to get constructed. So it's these guys that will actually deliver the solution in the interim. So a network of decentralized water treatment plants is going to be put out of the country. I mentioned agriculture. There's a lot of focus on hydroponics, on next generation agriculture, again, which is water efficient. 70% or 80% of Ganga's water goes for agriculture. World average in agriculture is 50%. So if you bring efficiency, which means more water available in the river bodies. The final area I'll cover is finance, and we've looked at it in a very systemic way. In fact, we've looked at the entire financing value chain and where it's broken and what needs to be done to fix it. So for those of you who understand project finance, there are 3 main categories. whilst you're developing the project, conceptualizing it, whilst you're constructing it, and finally when it's operational. We're actually started at the back end and working backwards rather than moving at this end. So the biggest challenge is, when I mentioned pricing and valuing of water, there is huge demand, but what's not there is the capacity, the financing capacity within our municipalities, because they're not charging enough to the households for water. So unless we raise water tariffs and increase revenue water, we're not going to solve the problem. So to bring that capital, so the first 10 years or so, it'll be government that will finance the water offtake as the water markets start to deliver. So where will government find that money? So the first major water Ganga Bond is being structured as we speak. That will come out, which is going to finance the entire massive offtake of the water. And if that offtake is available year on year on year, the investors who finance the construction piece are comfortable that, yes, there is money in the system. There was talk of solar projects where governments are reneging on their commitment. That's because there isn't enough money to buy the power. So we're not going to make that mistake when it comes to water. We'll actually first create enough capital to buy water and do that offtake, and then start massive construction activity. And when it comes to construction, we're developing blended finance strategies and structures, and I'll mention some of those in a second. And then finally coming on to some impact funds, which will help us create the right type of projects and bring that knowledge from around the world into India. So I mentioned the Ganga Bond. It will be one of the most interesting ESG compliant bond out there. We've talked to investors again globally. There's huge appetite for the bond, but what's missing is the vehicle through which investors can plow money into the market. So we need to create those international feeders and get on indices that were mentioned in the morning. Some of the financial instruments, for those of you who are fintech savvy, there's blockchain coming in, tokenization coming in. There's even evaluation of impact using blockchain in some very interesting facilities. We're developing some interesting foreign exchange hedging, FX hedging instruments using swaps and other structures. There are guarantee instruments being developed. So again, this kind of reflects the systemic approach that we are taking, not doing projects piecemeal. We have to address the entire ecosystem and address the points of failure in those. Last bits of my slides. There's a lot of outreach activity that's happening. The first country we actually set up a Clean Ganga chapter, cGanga chapter, was the UK. The Indian High Commissioner presides over it. And we're now establishing these chapters around the world. So UK is set up, EU is set up. We're going to go North America and Australia, New Zealand very soon. So people like yourselves can plug into the local country chapters and channel your know-how and interest through them. The engagement model is a government-to-government collaboration, and then through that, various agencies of the countries can then partner up, and a number of impact projects are delivered jointly. We implemented this model very successfully, starting with the Scottish government that partnered with the UK, with India, and quite a few Scottish companies got through the system through this mechanism. So just the sort of last bits. So if you're a technology company, engineering focused, come through the ETV program. You'll be given, if you've got the goods, we'll deliver you the project, so you don't have to go hunting for a real demonstration project, and it'll get back-ended into VC funds. If you are a data and information AI-driven company, come partner with the Ganga Knowledge Center. If you are a professional lawyer or a finance expert, join some of our working groups through the Centers of Excellence. If you're a contractor and a project developer, come and showcase your expertise through an impact project. And finally, if you're an investor, there are a number of instruments and vehicles that we have established. We run a flagship event at Vigyan Bhavan in Delhi every year. This time it's 5th to 7th of December. UK always has a very strong presence. And we also have a number of road shows, and hopefully this year, as Manish mentioned, the NMCG officials couldn't make it. We're likely to have them on 21st and 22nd of November, and we'll organize events at the High Commission where you are invited. So that's it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brian Kilkelly from Climate-KIC. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. It's good to be here this afternoon. And thanks for the invitation to the party. It's always good to have a party. So hopefully I'm free on the 21st. And it was great to hear the words about systemic change, because I think that's something which we recognize at the EU Commission and at Climate-KIC, is that we're not going to get there by just moving forward step by step. The International Panel on Climate Change has called for a rapid and unprecedented transformation of our systems. And I'm sure most of you are aware and acknowledge the fact that the kind of transformation we need to see globally in order to be able to meet the 1.5 degree targets is something we've never seen before. So certainly the scale of challenge both in Europe and in India is enormous, and actually business as usual and the old ways of doing things, we can't just get better at doing those, we need to look at much more transformative ways of doing things. And it's been fantastic sitting here listening to the stories and the ways many organizations are approaching this, and to be hearing lots of mentions of things like behavior change, of systemic change, of whole-scale systems and ecosystems being built up, and we certainly very much support that kind of way of working. So for the last 10 years, Climate-KIC, which is the organization that I'm working for, has been supporting innovation in Europe to tackle climate change. So we've spent about 350 million euros supporting 2,500 startups and organizations with innovation projects. And in fact, Agvesto is one of our startup successes. So it's great to see Srini on the stage talking about how we can transform agriculture using data. That's definitely one of our kind of success stories in terms of bringing different systems together to make change happen. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we feel that we are not doing a great job at tackling climate change, despite lots of fantastic innovations that we can point to and lots of activity that we can point to. But if we're honest with ourselves and we stop and look around ourselves, we're not really winning the battle on climate change. So we're heading for 3.5, 4, maybe 5 degrees of warming by the end of the century. And we have no idea how bad it's going to get if we continue on that path. And currently emissions are still growing. We haven't peaked yet. We're still pumping more CO2 in than we can possibly deal with, and we're seeing the consequences around the world already. So we do need to do things very differently. And the question is, I guess for all of us in this room, is if we're going to see success in India and success in the rest of the world, then how do we do things differently? So Climate-KIC is changing. What we're doing is we're saying, actually, rather than supporting innovation and good ideas, why don't we cluster innovations around some serious system change? So let's look at the drivers of change: procurement, policy, behavior, and yes, finance, and think about how can a group of innovations really make rapid progress on those drivers of change. So we've created a strategy which we call our deep demonstration strategy, which looks at working with challenge owners, like the Ganga, and to say, what is it that you really need to do? What is behind your challenge? What's the deep needs regarding those challenges? And then to help those challenge owners develop a really clear intent in terms of the journey they want to get to. And through that, identify what are the systems that need to change. So when you think about the Ganga, and we think about India, what are the underlying systems that need to change? And I think you've certainly identified some of those in your speech. And then the question is, what are the portfolio of innovations we can put around that change to really rapidly learn and experiment? So I think one of the things we can all identify today is that there's an enormous amount of tools and complexity around all of our work. I mean, the amount of acronyms you hear today is incredible. The amount of products and tools that we all have at our disposal is amazing. The challenge is, how do we combine those tools and combine those systems in a way that brings about rapid change? And the answer is, we don't know. Nobody has the answer in this room here. So we need to learn and experiment and try much more rapidly. So in a way, it's kind of rapid prototyping. So how do we create systems and create processes which allow us to try and to fail, potentially, but to learn quickly? And when we find out things that work, then we can scale up and pile in. So I think one of the questions for us, actually, in terms of unlocking change now, is not so much how do we transform the finance system. How does the City of London, how do you here today, and how do you work with India to change finance? But actually, how can finance be used to change systems in India? How can we deploy capital in a different way to help make change happen in India more quickly? And one of the challenges we recognize is the idea of single asset investment. So a lot of our vehicles and a lot of our processes are built up around the idea of single investments. Specific tools for specific jobs that are optimized in a kind of an industrial way to be very efficient at what they do. What we're not very good at, and I think you did touch on this, was actually putting together portfolios of investment that can help achieve an outcome or a systems change. And we do need more capacity collectively, in a way a collective intelligence, to put together different portfolios of investments in order to make challenge happen. So a very clear intent, a very clear vision of what you want to achieve, and then in terms of delivering that change, how do we put together the various partners and portfolios to help achieve that change? We call that transformation capital. So that's what we do at Climate-KIC, and we'll be delighted to talk to more of you. The European Union is very keen to partner with India. We see lots of opportunities for investment, exchange of knowledge, learning from each other. We want to make India successful, because actually if we don't make India successful and help you be successful, then actually Europe is doomed as well. So we're in this together. Please talk to us, and let's find out ways in which we can build different systems and bring about this rapid change much more quickly and crucially in time, before time runs out. Thank you.
Run out of time. Sorry, we've run out of time. And Mohan, can we take some questions? Yeah. Okay. One question. Deepak.
Thank you very much for chairing a very interesting panel and both very good speakers. My question is to Sanmit, and maybe I've misunderstood, so forgive my ignorance to start with. You mentioned about pricing of water. What is the political risk of that? Because that is a populist move, and if they raise the price of water, the votes fly out of the window. So how would that be addressed? Because that is central from what you were saying to the problem.
Where do I start? I also put out a disclaimer right at the beginning that we've been at it for the last 10 years. And the change, it's almost like we're using a a Trojan horse methodology. So light up lots of fires, lots and lots of them, and they're packaged in a way that from an optics perspective, they look good. But essentially what we are trying to do is pricing and valuing water. And I'll give you 2 or 3 examples. The smart city framework, one of the headline objectives is 24/7 water. And to do 24/7 water, and some of the cities have achieved that status, their primary goal is to increase what's called revenue water, right? Where people actually pay for water. So it started off as pilots in 2 or 3 different cities, very successful, and now more and more cities want to get onto that bandwagon. We're developing an incentive, it's both carrot and stick with the industry. So the stick is, if you don't stop polluting, we'll shut you down, and many tanneries, for instance, have been shut down, and they were very spot on. There was political protection almost given to many of these industries because there are lots of jobs supposedly at loss. But what was mentioned right at the beginning, if you don't internalize the cost of environmental pollution into the products and solutions today, we're doomed. So finally, the tannery industry, much like their similar counterparts in Tirupur, southern India, they have now come on board and said, okay, we will start paying for treated water. The thermal power stations, all of them are on the banks of River Ganga, take fresh water out of the system for their cooling towers purposes. All are now started to pay for water. So we started with municipalities which could afford and which are implementing the 24/7 solution. We've started now going after the industry. The next biggest challenge will be the agriculture sector. And there we're going to use a slightly different instrument, which is a bit like carbon trading, cap and trade model, where you give them water rights, water quota, and those who actually implement efficiency-based solutions will get credits which they can sell to others in the market. So you put money in the pockets of the farmers for reducing water consumption rather than so that way actually we're indirectly pricing and valuing water. So as I said, this is a 25-year journey and a program. You can't achieve it overnight, but there are lots of fires lit up now that some total systemic approach, behavioral shift is being achieved. And now that we're starting to bring data on stream, one of the biggest things that we're going is giving a tool where, and using Alchemy's system, is give a tool to the municipalities today do not know what the cost of water supply is. Many of them don't know, right? But using this system and tool, they will now know what the cost of water supply is. So there's a lot of things happening, and that's how you win the political battle.
Yeah. So, yeah. Thank you. No, Brian, you wanted to ask something? Yeah. Just a minute.
I mean, I think it's a great question, and perhaps one of the things we're recognizing is that the question to ask? Will people pay for water, or is there a different way of framing that and saying, and I think you've touched on this, I guess, is how do you get people to value water? How do you get people to see the true value of water and actually to recognize the need to invest in that system, and what can that bring to enrich their lives? So which is, I guess, is the behavior thing, change thing, which has been mentioned a few times, and changing of mindsets. And that will take quite some time. So recognizing the value of maybe changing the question or changing the dynamic.
So, Mohan, are we okay?
I have an answer.
Yeah. Mr. Malhotra, and incidentally, Mr. Malhotra is committed to helping clean the Ganga with support from his company. Mr. Malhotra.
Good afternoon. How are you, Sanmit?
Thank you. Ganga is flowing, so.
I want to correct your statement, not for cleaning Ganga. We were given the responsibility for beautification of the banks of the Ganga. And we had taken it, our group, to Kanpur, because that's my birthplace. And we have spent a lot of money, but as Sanmit has rightly said, without a structured organization in India, we are still making rounds to the commissioner, district collector in Kanpur, who has not allotted us anything still. So that's where is the problem. Unless I was very happy to hear he said, you have made the ministry out of it, and you will be controlling it, and then you will create. Because otherwise, the only answer we get from our collector of Kanpur.
So, Mr. Mehrotra, we'll have the NMCG team here in
Yes,
sometime in November.
I know him. I had dealt with him.
We'll take up that issue with them, because they are the people who will be doing it, not these two panelists. With this, I'd like to close this session.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.